think the interesting thing for me is I was born in 1953, so that in 1959, when a lot of the big changes in desegregation occurred on the island, I was not an impressionable kid at that point in time. So my memories basically are of a desegregated Bermuda, not a segregated Bermuda. And I think for me, that's made my life easier in some respects, because I think people, particularly white people born before the 1950s, the early 50s, have a very different view and feel in some ways that they've lost something. I think mistakenly, but.
Just that period before you were born, when things were really rough in terms of racism in this country.
Yeah.
And, you know, blacks really were just about getting schooling. And the only jobs that were available to blacks was in a hotel, as a waiter, busboy, roll boy, bellboy, maid. And in a restaurant, the same thing. So we've had some difficult times in the past. And when I hear or had some little experience with this movement here, and I'm going to call it movement of the Aspen Group, I'm very pleased that they're taking note of some of the background. And then, of course, there have been changes, which I think Jeff will acknowledge after 53, when he was just come into this world. He's seen the changes, he's experienced them, and so on.
Right. And I saw them, obviously, from a different perspective of my father. So my father is more Audie's age. They were probably more on opposite sides of the fence than the same side of the fence. It's very easy for somebody to stand up and say, somebody's been disadvantaged. It's a whole different thing to stand up and say, I've been advantaged. And you can do this, you know, from a racial point of view, you can do it from a sex point of view, from, you know, there's all sorts of different ways to look at it. But it's very, very hard for people to accept that despite the fact they've toiled and struggled and had difficult times, that they've actually had an advantage. And I can categorically say from my own point of view that clearly I did have an advantage. And I think to an extent,
as a white boy,
as a white boy, and as a human being, Audie, you know, our kids, frankly, have advantages that a lot of kids in Bermuda don't have. I think if I wanted to pick an average kid out of a cradle down at the King Edward or whatever, and you know, the right family, the right schools, the right education, bring them back to the island, they would be probably more successful than if they didn't have those types of advantages. So where I see Bermuda headed, there is so much more that we can do to try and make sure that everybody in Bermuda has the equal opportunity that we all talk about.
Right. And this, everybody must come into it at this stage, because there was a fight between the white man and the black man. But I think where we are now, the world's got to be made, scratch the world. Bermuda's got to be made and molded by the present day generation for the future generations. And if the future generations are going to have rights, we've got to recognize those rights now, those entitlements to the people, to people generally. We've got to find a way to distribute the wealth more fairly among people who are going to treat other people fairly, and provides a pathway to give everybody their right.
And that's one of the things, interestingly enough, that I think we have a very good opportunity to effect a peaceful type of change. I think Bermuda's been through the last 5 years, you know, a huge catharsis in terms of how we've looked at a lot of different issues. And part of it is political, part of it is circumstantial. But the point is that everybody's very raw, very sore, and very upset. And I think a lot of people feel that by doing something for the community, you're giving up something. And I think we're in a position now to change that view. The issue now is, how do we make sure that these rights are actually exercised? And I guess where we see the clear evidence that they're not being exercised is the prisons, you know, they're full of black kids. Basically, the educational system, where basically the private educational system is doing a better job than the public system, despite the fact that there's a whole bunch more funds going into the public system. How do we help make that happen? How do we move that forward? Employment is another area where obviously, and that's part of education, but we want to give people a chance, but they can't even get a chance if they don't have the proper educational tools. We've got a collective group, 70 people, 75 people that have been through
I think so.
sort of the Aspen experience, as it were.
Yeah.
These are people that are committed to making the type of changes that we are just talking about here.
We've got to remedy it by all people, the blacks and the whites getting together and say that we've got to give things more fairly and more justly to everybody. And we got to, and I accept that point about education. And we got to have social services that answer to the social needs of the country.
But we, as citizens and as concerned Bermudians, I think can work outside of government to make these things happen in a more regular basis. And interestingly enough, the group of people that have come together because of Aspen is broadly an integrated Bermuda. They are mostly, I think without exception actually, successful and older Bermudians, relatively speaking. To me, basically, I would like to pass it on sooner rather than later to younger, more active Bermudians who it is their future and in their interest basically to help create this. But clearly we're a resource, we've had experience, we know, sort of where the pitfalls are. We probably have got some issues from in time, but I think as a group collectively, we can work to help with that.
I think, Jeff, we really probably have a good basis now for to find the answers and find the pathway, as I put it all the time, towards improving our social and our economic situation in the interest of the country, of all people.
We have the laws in place to do certain things, but we tend right now to stand back and say, well, government should do it because we pay our taxes, and government should do this, and government should do that.
Yeah.
And the sad reality is we do elect them, but fundamentally they're just government. It's us that need to make the changes. It's us in our everyday lives, the way we approach people, the way we deal with people, and the way collectively that we approach problems and issues. And to rely on 36 people in the House of Assembly to solve our problems is clearly not realistic. Exactly.
So it's the people's fight.
Yeah. Cool. Good work.
All right.